Hey everyone, in this tutorial, you're going to learn how to build this website that uses OpenAI's brand new vision feature, which allows you to chat with images using their API. So if you're a developer interested in AI, you're definitely going to want to watch this full video so you don't fall behind. So let's go ahead and dive into what we're going to be building.
So this is a simple one-page application that was built using NextJS, and all the AI magic is happening over here on the right side. So what we can do is come in here to this chat container and we can upload an image. In our case, I'm just going to upload a thumbnail. And what I can do is give it some instructions. So I can say, hey, please let me know how I can improve my YouTube thumbnail to optimize for like a higher click-through rate. And then once I'll do is I'll send it. We'll get back some, loading animations to let us know that OpenAI is off doing their thing. And then from there, what it'll do is respond back with a update. And what's super cool is that it actually analyzes the image we passed up. So in our case, it's saying, hey, this is great, but want to make sure that things are large and bold so people can focus clearly. And it provides a ton of great feedback. So this is exactly what we're going to be building. And what we're going to do next is go ahead and hop over to the documentation so we can cover what we're going to be building. And then immediately after that, we'll actually hop in and start building the app. So let's go ahead and dive in.
Oh, wait, real fast. I want to mention that I'm giving away all the source code for this project for free. All you have to do is click the link down in the description below and it'll take you over to that. And the reason I'm doing that is because A, you're awesome, and then B, I just want us to focus on the new OpenAI vision features instead of setting up, lame boilerplate code. So let's go ahead and hop back into the tutorial.
All right, welcome everybody to the new vision docs. So here are the 4 things that I think you need to know before we start coding. So the first thing is this new model actually has a name and it's called GPT-4 Vision Preview. And up to this point, you've probably just used GPT 3.5 Turbo or GPT-4. So this is a brand new model that's going to allow us to actually start submitting images to our backend API. And the second thing that I think is great to know is that pretty much if you have access to GPT-4 as a developer, you have access to this new vision model. So you don't have to worry about joining any waitlist or anything weird like that. And the next thing is, I think is important for you to realize is that you are charged based off of your tokens, and your tokens are directly correlated to basically how big your images are. So if you pass in a very large image at a very high detail, you're going to be charged basically more for this. But to provide some more context, I've used this for like the majority of this evening. So I've submitted about, let me just show you. I've submitted about 13 different images. And so far, and these images were 1024 by 1024. And so far I'm going to have to pay a penny for this. So nothing crazy. And this leads us to the fourth thing. And this is the biggest one. So up to this point, this is a model change. And what I mean by that is up to this point, everything when it comes to chatting with this new model is basically the same. You come in here and you say, hey, I'm going to chat to this new model. But if you remember previous versions of ChatGPT, you would pass in a message with a user with a role of, a user or assistant. And then the content would just be a string. So if you hop back over to the old version, what you'll realize is when you're using GPT 3.5 Turbo, you would just say, hey, role, and then content would be a string. But now they've completely changed the game. So what I mean by that is when you're working with images, your content property can now be an array. And this array will be an array where you have text and images. So this text is basically where you're going to pass in the prompt saying, hey, like what's in these images, rate my thumbnail like we just did a few minutes ago. And then you're going to pass in all the different images that you want to analyze. So this is the major change that we're going to be implementing today in our code when we start to build out the app we just talked about a little bit ago. But I just want to go ahead and show you that this is completely different. And the other thing that I think is important to realize is what you'll notice so far is that they have URLs for their images, but if you scroll up in their documentation, you don't have to use URLs that are pointing to somewhere on the web. You can actually upload your own images. You just need to convert them to base 64 before you do that. So we're going to be doing all this in this tutorial. So let's go ahead and start diving into the code. So now we're on to the fun part where we're going to start coding. And just to recap real fast, all the source code that you're about to see is available down in the description below. You have to click the link and you'll be able to download everything so you can just build it yourself. So just to recap though, how this is even made in the first place, this is a NextJS project is what I've built. And just to install the project to get it created, I just ran this command right here and that created my NextJS project. And you pretty much end up with a boilerplate code like we have over here. And this, I'll have a link to it down in the description below. Okay, cool. So now what we can do is actually run through the app at a very high level, and I can actually just point out some components just so you understand how everything works together, and then we'll hop into actually all of this uploading images, passing it over to OpenAI, and so forth and so forth. Okay, so the first file that I want to show you is actually our generic page layout, which is the parent page for our application. Okay, cool. So at the root level, what we have is our root page in our Next.js application. And all we're saying is, hey, we want to have two components on our screen, our introduction card over here on the left side of our screen. And then on the right side, we want to have our chat container. And our chat container is the component that contains all the logic for sending off our images to our backend. And it also contains all the logic for displaying messages in a nice, clean way, just like this, and handling uploading different files to this component. So what we're going to do is hop in here. And what I want to do is take you from top to bottom and actually just pull up resources to explain why I'm doing everything that I'm doing inside of this component to hopefully make it all make sense. And then after we run through this front end component, what I'm going to do is take you over to the back end too, so you can see why we're passing, what we're passing over, and how we're, sending stuff over to OpenAI and then passing it back. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and start at the top and then work our way down. So the first thing you'll notice inside of this React component is that I'm defining a bunch of different types. And the reason I'm doing this is because if you head back over to the documentation, our end goal is we want to prepare ourselves to send over a body or a payload that looks just like this, where we have messages, where we're assigning a role, that can be user, assistant, or system. And then inside of that message, we also want to define a content. And if you remember, like I just mentioned a few seconds ago, content has changed. In the past, content used to only be, of type text, but now it has changed to where we could also pass in image URLs just like this. So that is why now we're just finding a new message type that says, hey, I want my content type to be of type message content, where we basically have two options. We can be the text content just like this, or we could be of type image content just like this. So that is why I defined all of these different types right out the get-go. It's because we're shooting to create a payload of this type. That way we can pass it over to OpenAI. All right, cool. So now that we have that out of the way, let's walk through what we're going to be doing when it comes to managing state inside of this chat component. So at a very high level, this chat container, we only really care about 4 major things. So the first thing is our images. So whenever we click this little paperclip icon, we want to keep track of what images we're uploading. So this is how we're going to keep track of all those images. And then obviously we can press X to get rid of images. Great. The next thing we care about is the message we're typing in here. We want to know, what we're typing, because eventually what we're going to have to do is pass the new message we're creating up to our messages list. That's the third thing we're going to keep track of, because our messages are what shows up here in our little chat window. So that's the third thing we care about. And the fourth thing we care about is, are we sending a request to OpenAI? Because if we are, we want to change this send icon to a spinner. That way we can provide responsiveness to our users. Great. So now that we've kind of talked about what we care about, these 4 different states, what I want to do is walk through the different functions that are going to be triggered inside of this container. And that way it'll all hopefully make sense. So whenever we do finally click this send button to send all of our payload to the backend, you'll understand how we got there in the first place. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and dive into the first one and work our way down. Okay, so for our first function, what we want to do is handle image change. And this gets triggered anytime we click the paperclip. So whenever I click the paperclip and I come in here and let's just say I click 2 images, for example, what would happen is whenever I pressed OK, we would have 2 files that were attached to this eTarget files. So what I want to do is convert those files into an array. And what I'm trying to do is append those new images to my images list. And the reason why is because I want to show them in a little preview. So let me go ahead and do that real fast. Let's just say I want to attach these 2 images. But what it's going to do is add those 2 images right here, because that's where I'm going to show my image preview. And what you'll notice is I'm also setting a limit of basically like 5 available slots. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I don't want to hit any size limits. Like I said, OpenAI can handle up to 20 megabytes. I think that was the maximum file size. And basically anything past 5 images and it starts to just get gross for the UI. Plus, we're paying per token. So the more images we have to process at higher resolution, we could start to rack up a bill. So we're just going to put some limits on ourselves. And so that's what we're going to do first with this handle image change. And the next thing that you'll notice is we have remove image. So what remove image does is this function is attached to the little X. So whenever I click X on this, let me just click it right here. What you'll notice is that it'll get rid of the image that we were just clicking on. And then that way, the user can actually come in here and change what's happening. Fantastic. So the next function that we're going to work on is handling message change. And what this does is it gets triggered every time we type into this box right here. So I could say, hey, YouTube. So what will be happening in the back end is we are changing our message to match the text that I'm setting in here. So that's what that function does. And you can actually, if we go down here and find it at the very end, you'll see that this is getting triggered anytime our text area changes. Okay, cool. So let's hop back up top and continue to run through it. So the beefy message, the beefiest last function that we're going to talk about is sending the message. And this one, like I said, this one's going to go through basically everything. And I think it's important that we hop between this and the documentation as we go through it so it makes more sense. So let's go ahead and start doing that. And as we go through this major function, I just want you to keep two things in mind. Our main goal is to update our front end messages right here. So anytime we send a message, we want it to like instantly update like we're texting one of our friends on our phone. And the other thing that we're trying to do is to prepare our payload to be sent to the backend. So those are the two things we're trying to keep in mind as we walk through this function. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is set our sending to true. That way this icon will turn into a spinner. And the next thing we're gonna do is try to merge our messages and our images. And here's why we're doing that. If you hop back over to the final documentation, you'll realize for their messages, they basically have for their content, more specifically, their content is set up to be a series of a text object, and then the rest of them are going to be image objects. This was the major change we talked about at the very beginning of this video. And that's what we're going to try on working in here. We are going to create an array of message contents where the first item is going to be our message that comes from right here. And then the rest of the objects inside of this message content are going to be image URLs. So that's everything that we've uploaded into here. Okay, awesome. And then let's just hop back to the final blob that we're trying to build so it makes more sense. So this is the message content. So think we've just, check, we have built the content. So the next thing that we need to do is create the message itself. So that's why we are going to now add a role, because we are the user and we're the one trying to send this message. And we are now appending our message content. So role check, content check, and technically we built messages as well. So check, check, check. So what we're going to do instantly after creating this message is we are going to append our new user message. And what this would mean is basically as we press enter, we're going to instantly add our message here. So it provides instant feedback and a smooth experience. So it looks like we've sent off the message to be processed. Great. So the next thing that we're going to work on is converting images to base 64. And I know this might be a weird thing to do, but here's why we're doing it. So if you head over to the documentation, you'll realize that images can be made available to the model in two ways. The first one is to pass a link, and the other one is to base 64 encode the images. And instead of, creating a blob store and passing images and uploading them there, what we're going to do, I found it to be the easiest, is let's just go ahead and encode everything as base 64 locally. And what this will do, in case you haven't used base 64 encoding, what it'll do is it'll make a super long string. Yeah, they don't have an example here, but basically what it'll do is make like a super long string that's like, thousands of characters. It's basically the string representation of your image. So what we're going to do in our code is we have a few lines of code that will convert all of our images over to a base 64 string. So that's what's happening right here. Okay, fantastic. And then now what we're going to do is move on to constructing our final payload that's going to include the base 64 strings. So what we're doing here is basically exactly what we did earlier, where we created our messages, we have our user role, our content, and then the next thing we're going to focus on doing is updating our image URLs to no longer point to our blob stores. We really just want to go ahead and use that base 64 string that we just generated. Okay, cool. So this is the payload that we're going to be passing off to OpenAI. And we're just going to pause for a second just to recap. There was two major things that we just did. The first thing we were trying to do is update our front end state. And the second thing, like I said, what we're trying to do is prepare everything to be sent off to our backend payload. So that was everything that we just talked about from line 60 all the way down to line 110 was strictly setting things up for those two different scenarios. Okay, cool. So now we're off to the part where we're actually going to send our payload off to the backend. We'll hop over to this portion in a second, but what we're trying to do is we're going to send that payload, and if it comes back with some sort of an error, we're just going to provide a quick little pop-up. Toast error is, this is a quick pop-up that will appear on our screen. It'll be bright and red and say, hey, there was some sort of issue with the backend server. You didn't pass up everything that you needed to. Some error occurred. And if that doesn't happen, what we're going to do is we are going to append the new message to the existing messages. So that's what you'll notice is our initial message is purple. And what will happen is when we get a message back from OpenAI is it'll come back and we want to append their message right under ours. So that way it kind of looks like a chat conversation that you're having with your friend. So that's what you'll notice. We get our new message back from the response and we add that new message to the end of our message list. So that's exactly what's happening in all of this code. So I hope that makes sense. And what we're going to do next is we're going to hop over to the backend and start figuring out what's actually happening over here on this OpenAI endpoint. So to open up this new endpoint, all we have to do is open up our File Explorer, and then we're going to go to the API/OpenAI route. And just in case you haven't used NextJS before, they use basically path-based routes. So because I have a folder called API and then I have a folder called OpenAI, that becomes the route where I can, set up a new endpoint. Okay, cool. So here is our new endpoint where we're going to be sending a request, our OpenAI. And once again, I want to walk you from top to bottom to explain what's going on. And that way it'll hopefully all make sense and realize the reason why we're sending stuff from the front end in that specific format. So let's go ahead and dive in. So right out the gate, what you'll notice is we have a bunch of schemas set up in our backend route. And the reason why we're doing that is we're using a NPM package called Zod, which allows us to make schemas that allow us to basically validate the information that's being sent to us on the front end. Because we don't want to just take in any information and start running with it before we send it off to OpenAI. We want to verify that we're working with the right type of data. And how do we know we're working with the right type of data? Well, going back to the documentation, we know we need to have content that's set up with, text and images set up this way. So that's exactly what's happening over here. Anytime we receive a request from the front end, we are expecting to have a bunch of different messages in it. A message is going to have a type role and content, just like this, and content can be of type text or image. This is basically the same thing that was happening on the front end. We honestly could do some refactoring and put this schemas in a shared area to where we could basically generate types for the front end and then schemas for the back end and share the code. But we're mostly focused on the big picture today with, the new OpenAI vision features. Okay, cool. So let's keep on chugging along and going from here. What we're going to do is we're setting up a new post endpoint. And what we're trying to do is say, hey, I want to pull out the JSON request that was sent to me, basically the payload that came from the front end. And what I want to do is safely parse this data using the schemas I just created. And what we're going to do is, in case these messages were not put together properly or just invalid, we want to send a response back to our front end to say, hey, I did not like what you sent me. This was not successful. And if you remember back on the front end, this is where we actually made a little toast pop-up that will pop up red inside of our application up top and say, something went wrong. That's why we set that up. Okay, cool. But if things did go well, what we want to do is pull out all of the different messages that were sent to us. And from here, what we're going to do is focus on creating a payload. And this payload, once again, is just going to follow this exact process right here. So our model, we want to use the new model that was just given to us. Thank you, OpenAI. We're going to pass in our messages and then our max tokens. Max tokens are basically just going to say that, hey, I don't want to, if you were to pass in like an ungodly sized image, you could, and you were to do a bunch of them, you could basically rack up a build pretty quickly. So this max tokens will make sure you stay within limits. And the next thing you'll notice is that we're setting up our headers. So our headers is where we actually pass in our OpenAI key. And if you haven't used your OpenAI key yet, what you need to do is if you go to your settings, you can go over to your API keys, and then what you can do is create a new secret key. So in my case, I'm using this ChatGPT for Vision Basics. And what you'll do is you'll copy that secret key and you'll come over here and you need to paste it in your .env file. So this will just be put in the root of your folder. Yeah, you'll just paste it right here. Make sure you say OpenAI key, just like I have it here, and then go ahead and paste in your secret key. It is important to mention though, if you're going to do this, you need to update your .getignore file because you don't want to paste secret keys to the internet. Like I'm going to go delete this after I make the video. But if someone else has access to your secret key, they could do all sorts of stuff like, running up your bill, and because they can charge to your account. Okay, cool. So let's hop back to it. What we're going to do when we go back to let's go back to the documentation. So now they're back to the documentation. What you can see is we need to pass along this authorization bearer key so that they know who's making the request. And that's what we're doing here inside of our headers. All right. So then what we're doing now at the very bottom is we are going to make a post request to this URL, this OpenAI chat completions. We're going to pass along the payload with our model messages and max tokens, and then we're going to pass along our headers. We're basically recreating this curl request, but we're doing it over here in TypeScript instead. And then what you'll notice next is we are going to get back a response. So where in the world do we get this response data choices messages? Like, how do we know that that's what we need to pull the message from? Now we have to head to the doc so I can show you the answer. So if we just make this screen a little bit bigger and head over to API references, like I said, just make this a little bit bigger so we get that sidebar. And then all we need to do is go down to completions, because if you remember, we're hitting up the completions endpoint. So this tells us what we get back. So what you'll notice, we get back a response and we want to access the data inside of that response, and that data object is going to basically give us access to this. So what we want to do is we want to grab the choices property, and from there we want to grab, because it's an array, we just want to grab the first element out of the array. So choices, at the first spot. And then from there, all we want to do is grab the message. So what you'll notice here is that this is going to be text, but it actually does change over to message. And for our use case, whenever you actually shoot over to basically to the vision preview model, it's message instead of text. So that's the one caveat that I want to point out. And I actually had to troubleshoot that and find it myself. I had to send a few curl requests to figure out like, why is it not working? And that's how I figured out it was a message instead of text. Okay, cool. So let's make this even again, and we can hop back over to our final code so we can see what's going on. Okay, great. So what we're doing is, once we've pulled out that final message, what we're going to do is then send that back to our front end and say, yes, we successfully generated a response from OpenAI, and here is the new message. And then coming back full circle, what you'll notice in the chat container, this is where we get our new message. And this is where we add our new message to the end of our old messages. And that's basically how it all works.
So congrats guys, you just figured out how to build a full stack application that's hooked up to OpenAI's new vision feature, which means you can start chatting with images. And hopefully after this, you'll start going off to build your own applications using this new feature. And I do want to mention, if you got stuck at any point in this tutorial, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. My link's down in the description below. Drop a comment, or if you want to get on a call with me, there should be a little Calendly link in the description below. You and I can just hop on a quick call together and knock out your problem. But outside of that, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. And if you did, there's actually a bunch of other content just like this on my channel. We recently just built an entire SaaS application that's hooked up to Stripe, ChatGPT, has authentication and a bunch more, so that you can start actually making money off of your ideas that you're able to build. But with that, I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you on the next video.